Hello viewers and welcome to another commentated match of Warhammer 40,000 Conquest. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm pleased to share with you the video I filmed for the 5th week of Sam Mann's Black Crusade, his online Conquest LCG competitive league. Thus far in the tournament I've gone undefeated for the past 4 consecutive weeks, but going into today's matchup, I unfortunately know next to nothing in regard to what to expect to my also as of yet undefeated opponent. 2 weeks ago, I played against Rick Reinhardt. He placed in the top 16 of the 2015 Conquest LCG World Championship event, but he's built up quite a bit of a reputation in our community for playing as Packmaster Kith. With that information in mind, I was able to design a deck specifically built to defeat the Packmaster, and even though Rick ended up playing as Eldorath, for better or worse, I had that information going into the game, and I was lucky enough to end up beating Rick after all. But last week, I had the poor fortune of being paired against someone widely considered by many to be one of the utmost talented and skillful, competent players in the entirety of the Conquest LCG community, and indeed throughout the world. It was Davis Tower Kingsley. But Davis has a reputation for playing as Zarather, and he said specifically that had he attended the 2015 World Championships, he'd have not only played as Zarather, but he shared his specific deck list. And having a week of knowing that I was going to be paired against Davis, knowing probably what he was rather likely to play, I was able to design a specific Space Marine faction deck list that I feel would have given me the absolute best chance of beating Zarather. I was lucky enough that Davis did decide to play more or less that exact deck. I was able to beat Davis with a little bit of luck, a little bit of skill, but now I find myself in our 5th week's match going up against another undefeated player, and apart from knowing that he's Octagon user redangelofpeace, that his first name is Chris, and that he's friends with a friend of mine, Parker Ince, and that he's got about a 50% win rate against a rather formidable player in Parker, I really didn't have any kind of information or foresight going into this match that I could try to use to leverage against this player to my advantage. And considering I record each and every match I ever play, Chris has got a nice little library of information to see my strategy, my areas of strength, weakness, my preference of faction and Warlord. There's all kinds of information about me to be gleaned from my channel, so I felt distinctly disadvantaged going into this week's match, but in lengthy discussion with Guy Lev and of course Travis McDaniel, someone who's responsible for designing this deck list I decided to run, I picked Broderick Worr to give me the best chance of beating all comers. This match is actually the first time I've ever actually played against Broderick Worr, and I've got to say I was definitely surprised to see that this was going to be a mirror match. This is a rather, marathon of a game. It's definitely a bit of an epic, so in taking things slowly, I decided to keep my opening hand. In hindsight, I'm not exactly sure if that was the best choice. I've got a formidable combat unit in that Anxious Infantry platoon. I've got a command unit in my Iron Guard recruits. The Steel Legion Chimera is nice. It's got that hefty 4 value hull, which is going to be able to survive an attack of 3 from something like, an Anxious Infantry platoon. Broderick himself is only going to be able to attack for 2. So I felt as though the Steel Legion Chimera might end up being a unit that I could relatively safely put out to planet number 1. It's got a nice durable body, and if need be, I could reinforce it with the copy of Troop Transport that I was fortunate enough to stumble upon. So, planet number 1 is Planum. It's a green planet. That means I could use Troop Transport to reinforce my Steel Legion Chimera at that planet, but in deciding to keep this mulligan, I was kind of going off of a fair few different things. Like planet number 1, I was hoping that I'd be able to keep that planet, win that planet, because I could throw down that Steel Legion Chimera, back it up with a troop transport. I began the game with a staging ground, and I was thinking I could either put out the Anxious Infantry platoon in my hand to one of the several other green planets in play, or I could potentially use staging ground to dump that at the first planet. And I was kind of deciding what exactly I wanted to do based on what my opponent was putting into play. So, as one of my first deploy actions, I throw out the zero-cost limited support, just wanting to see where exactly my opponent throws his command icon-laden units. And as my second action, I played another support, trying to reveal as little information as possible to my opponent, a 1-copy card in this deck, which is staging ground. It's great to get around Gleeful Plague Beast to act as a bit of an ambush effect. If I run Rattling Deadeyes, any kind of effects like that, I can kind of pick and choose where exactly I want to send units, and if I get a forward barracks into play, staging ground is very adaptable, depending on where exactly the enemy Warlord goes. Like, I could, let's say the enemy Warlord shows up at planet number 5, I could staging ground a unit into play at that planet, I could shield against Broderick's attack, then I could generate a guardsman token, and I could create a situation where Broderick is basically forced to give up the bonus, or the battle ability associated with that planet. So, my opponent, much to my dismay, threw out a copy of Ammo Depot, and I'm definitely wanting to try to kind of deprive my opponent of as many cards as is possible, and what will become clear throughout the course of this game is that my opponent kind of tried to do the same to me with resources. So, planet number 1, note, I've got the initiative token, it's Planum. I'm thinking, okay, my opponent put down a copy of Steel Legion Chimera, but my plan is going to be throwing out my own copy of Steel Legion Chimera. I can attack first for 3 thanks to Broderick. I can damage my opponent's unit. He won't have any opportunity to retreat, and then if he decides to not play any additional combat units to that planet, I'll have the opportunity to act first, and even if I see some, monumental number of shield cards, I could still trigger that troop transport and win Planum, and then relocate some powerful combat units, probably to planet number 2. Note, my opponent put out a copy of Talarn Raiders positioned at planet number 4, Boundless, the random card discard planet, and I was thinking that that would either be a really convenient early victory condition for him or for me, but considering I was the fortunate player starting off with initiative, I felt like that would be a pretty good planet for me to try to win the game. Like, at the moment, I was just kind of fixed on, wanting to dump out that Steel Legion Chimera, and then I was trying to think, going into combat, I would be able to throw out that copy of Anxious Infantry platoon. So note, at the moment, I'm tied for command at planet number 1. I'm not getting any resources from planet number 4, but in all honesty, I was kind of expecting to go into the first turn's command phase and win 1 resource so that I could throw the Anxious Infantry platoon to a planet, just because if Broderick Worr showed up at a planet alone, like let's say Broderick goes to planet number 2, I could use staging ground to dump my platoon at that planet. Broderick has initiative, he attacks me, he hits me for 2, I swing with the Anxious Infantry platoon for 4, then I throw out troop transport, I create 2 2/2 soldier trait guardsman tokens, and then I take another couple of swings at Broderick, and if that's the case, I either force him to use a bunch of shield cards, and that means he uses up effects like Preemptive Barrage or 2 Arms or the Emperor's Warrant, and, if that happens at a green planet, then I'll have those units sitting exactly where I want them. The Anxious Infantry platoon would be sitting at that planet where I will want it to be because it's directly fueling my victory condition if it's planet number 2, and the same exact thing can be said with the troop transport, but note, I'm pretty much counting on winning an additional resource, and whether or not that actually happens kind of remains to be seen. Something sucky about my opening hand is I've got both of those copies of Inquisitorial Fortress, and unless I can happen to bloody my opponent, then holding on to those 2 cards really isn't really gonna do me any good at all. So it was kind of a nice thing for me, in my mind, to see that Snakebite Thug being thrown out to planet number 2. That's gonna be 2 resources for the opponent during the command phase, but it's also gonna be kind of indicative of my opponent might be running units in his deck that I can use my fortresses against. So be sure to let me know in the comments, please, because I still don't consider myself a very experienced player. I have some modicum of skill, but like I said, this is my first opportunity to actually play against Broderick Worr, and I make a just mountain of suboptimal plays, and who actually ends up winning this game is going to remain to be seen. I definitely don't want to spoil it here, but those 2 Inquisitorial Fortresses are definitely not doing me much good. I certainly could have drawn a more command-oriented hand had I taken a mulligan, but I was thinking I should probably play it safe as opposed to doing something dangerous. And I feel as though this may have been a little bit of a mistake. So note that the enemy copy of Broderick Worr shows up to planet number 2. I instead go to planet number 4. What I was afraid of is I was afraid that my opponent, who has that ammo depot, was going to try to cut off my cards. So I'm already winning command at planet number 4, but I sent my Warlord to that planet regardless. I had it in my mind that a trick I'd be able to do would be to have Broderick arrive at that planet, and then I could use my first combat turn to retreat with my Warlord, and then my Iron Guard recruits would be able to attack that 0 attack value Tallarn Raider, but of course it has 1 attack value because of Broderick Worr. So it seems like that plan definitely didn't work out. It probably would have been much more intelligent for me in hindsight to end up going to planet number 2, just because it's a green planet, and that would have been great with staging ground, with troop transport to, like, if I'd have gotten the first swing against the enemy Broderick had he decided to stay, those guardsman tokens would have threatened to bloody, they'd have fueled my victory condition, and that would have been an absolutely perfect play. So it's kind of shitty that I actually sent Broderick to planet number 4, but at the very least I ended up getting those cards, and I ended up well, presuming I'm able to kill off this copy of Tallarn Raiders, and hoping and praying my opponent doesn't have any copies of Elysian Assault Team, then I will be able to, capture that planet. So at the combat here, my Steel Legion Chimera took a swing, my opponents took a swing. At the end of the first combat round, Chris attempts to retreat his Steel Legion Chimera. I take a moment to remind him that, of course, he cannot do that. He indicates it's been 10 days or so since he's actually had the opportunity to play Conquest. So not a big deal, but I definitely want to kill off his Steel Legion Chimera prior to it having the opportunity to retreat. And this first round, I'm surprised I did not just get absolutely stomped. As you can tell by the duration of this video, it's quite the long match indeed. But I'm just quite frankly shocked that this did not go absolutely horrible for me, because I was totally operating mentally. I felt like I was being so careful. I wanted to win Planum. I ended up doing it. I felt great about, that effect. But what do I want to do? I want to use Planum to relocate my Steel Legion Chimera to planet number 2. But if you look at my hand, I have a complete dearth of shield cards, and I was, for whatever reason, operating under the assumption that I had in my hand 2 resources, just because I was thinking full well, okay, Steel Legion Chimera, I'm going to reposition you to planet number 2. Broderick Worr has initiative. If he takes a swing, if he kills off my Chimera, I'm going to be able to staging ground Anxious Infantry Platoon into play. They're going to be able to attack for 4. Troop Transport is going to be able to blow itself up. That's going to be 2 Guardsman tokens that are each going to attack for 2, and that's going to be an absolutely amazing bloodying of Broderick Worr on the first turn, and I'm just going to make Chris look like a fool. But who ends up looking like the fool after this just abysmal first round? It's going to be the Hive Tyrant. So I often get a bunch of shit from the community for saying I don't consider myself to be a very skillful player. So take this first round as case in point. I've still got a hell of a lot of learning to do. So at planet number 2, I believe at this point I might be in the process of actively shitting my pants when I've suddenly realized that I don't have 2 resources. And further, if you note, at planet number 3, Broderick Worr, if I decide to retreat him from that planet, then my opponent is still going to have a 1/2 Tallarn Raiders, and even though I'm going to be attacking first with my Iron Guard recruits, if I decide to retreat my Warlord from that planet, if he's got a copy of Elysian Assault Team, then I'm no longer going to have any units to dump into play unless I save my staging ground to evict, or not my staging ground, my troop transport. And if I lose my Iron Guard recruits to an Elysian Assault Team, that means I'm going to be the player that has to suffer that random discard, and that would just be an absolute nightmare. But if I keep Broderick at that planet, I run the risk of attacking with him, and then my opponent, if he shields, is going to be able to swing back for 3, or even if he doesn't shield, if he's got one of those assault teams, he'll be able to drop 1 or more copies into play. That'll be able to attack for 3, and then Broderick is going to be half the way to bloodied, and as I'm sure you can see, there's no Iridial, there's no healing planet on the table, and this was just a very long, very stressful match indeed. And even now, just about a half an hour after playing the thing, definitely fair to say I'm still a little bit stressed out, but I decide to activate my troop transport, so I've got both of those guardsman tokens at planet number 2. My thought behind doing this was that I won't be able to bloody Broderick, because no opponent is that stupid, but I'll hopefully be able to push him away from the planet. Had things gone to plan, my guardsman tokens would have hit Broderick for 4, then they wouldn't have retreated. Maybe Broderick would have stayed at the planet, he'd have only been able to kill 1, then the other token would have had an opportunity to swing, and if not bloodied Broderick, it would have at least beaten the shit out of him, and then I could have used staging ground during a subsequent round to deal out just, the last little finishing blow to my opponent's Broderick, and Broderick Worr crumples whenever he happens to be bloodied, so I figured that would be just a fantastic opportunity to try to get as much damage onto Broderick as possible, but to my dismay, as I'm sure you saw, he threw out the Emperor's Warrant, that's what it's called. So for the cost of 2, he exhausts one of my guardsman tokens. Token A deals 2 points of damage to token B, and I'm forced to stay at this planet. So, what happened here? I threw away my copy of Troop Transport. It's a card. My opponent threw a copy of Emperor's Warrant out. He's down a card and 2 resources, so he's invested 2 resources in winning that planet, but I'm going to be out a copy of Troop Transport, and of course, as dumbass me didn't have enough resources to throw out a copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon, not only was I unable to push Broderick away from that planet too, and activate that battle ability for myself, but I had 1 resource left, and that means that Broderick was able to steal it from me, so I wasn't exactly feeling like it was insurmountable to try to come back and win against Chris, but God, in reviewing this match, it's quite frankly just a little bit embarrassing and a little bit humiliating to be publicizing how pathetic this first round's play was, just because I'd like to consider myself being a player that can scrape the utmost value out of all of these different plays, and I feel as though maybe if I had decided to mulligan my opening hand, it may have given me some just better tricks at my disposal, or if I had played, the Anxious Infantry Platoon instead of that Steel Legion Chimera, or maybe if I'd have gotten like a 1-cost Sakhalem Shrine Guard, that would have helped against Broderick, or if I had some sort of shields, but, I can't change what happened. All I can do is try to learn from it, so again, it's of critical importance to me to help me potentially get to the top cut, maybe beyond, that you, dear viewers, please let me know in the comments what you do differently. At planet number 1, God, this kind of sucks. I decide, instead of Broderick, I decided to keep Broderick at planet number 3. I want to kill off that Tallarn Raiders. I'm thinking to myself, okay, the recruits attack for 2, Broderick himself attacks for 2. I'm going to keep Broderick at that planet just because I cannot risk losing a random discard. My opponent only has 2 cards in hand. I definitely want to see that random discard. I'm terrified that he's going to throw out a copy of Elysian Assault Team, but I fail to kill his Iron Guard recruits because he discards that copy of Summary Execution. And that is going to be, my unit ending up being killed by his Talon Raiders. I'm thankful at least that the Raiders don't take a swing at my Warlord, just because I was kind of afraid of Broderick taking a lot of damage, but considering my opponent didn't, at least at this point, have Elysian Assault Team, have Staging Ground himself, whether Broderick could have stood to take that damage, it's probably better that my opponent did kill off that command unit, just because it was not only attacking for 2, but it also had 2 command icons, and had it been left sitting at that planet, then that would have been a lot of cards won turn after turn by me, without the necessity of me playing any additional cards. So, I do manage to survive. There's no Elysian Assault Team dropping, into play, damaging my Broderick. The forced random discard is going to be his second copy of Summary Execution, so I know that each and every copy of his signature event is now gone. Both of us players end up accruing 4 resources, drawing 2 cards during our HQ phase, and now, we see our new 5th planet. It's going to be Yavarn. It's the put a unit from your hand into play into your HQ planet. And it seems as though both of us were fortunate enough to draw copies of Troop Transport, so both of us play that. He's got the initiative token. His opening deploy stall is going to be a copy of Ammo Depot, and for the moment, I'm trying to think to myself, do I want to be aggressive and try to push planet number 1, try to win on planet number 3, or do I want to slow things down, give up planet number 1, give up planet number 2, try to win on planet number 3 and planet number 5? I was thinking that if I could do the economic thing, I might be able to win, like, in the long term against my opponent, but I don't have enough of, like, an economic lead right now. Like, note, my opponent is going to be the player with that ammo depot. So again, I'm thinking to myself, he's probably going to be drawing more cards than I am. I don't have a great command lead. The best thing I can hope for is throwing out these 2 copies of Anxious Infantry Platoon. My Inquisitorial Fortresses are really looking like they're just dead cards in my hand at the moment. So I've got 4 resources and 6 cards relative to my opponent's 7 resources and 3 cards. I've got a Steel Legion Chimera, but it's going to be very difficult indeed to play. Really, the only thing kind of working at all in my favor is I've got that copy of Staging Ground. So if I draw some cards, if I draw a cheap army unit like a Sakhalem Shrine Guard is probably the dream. If I've got the resources for it, I can toss one of those units down wherever it's relevant, but my opponent's got the initiative token, so that about sucks, and I'm trying to think where do I want to put these units? Like, do I want to put my platoons at planet number 4 and try to make that planet very undesirable for my opponent's copy of Broderick Worr to show up to, and then, like, push, like, let's say I could send Broderick Worr to planet number 4, I could put my Anxious Infantry platoons so that they're kind of piled up on planet number 3, and make that an incredibly nasty destination for Broderick. Wherever he ends up blowing his troop transport, I don't have to worry about that too much, because I've got my own troop transport, and Staging Ground could definitely be a factor coming into play. So at the moment, I'm trying to decide, do I want to go for planet number 1? Do I want to go for planet number 3? What definitely sucks is, even though my opponent doesn't have a whole lot of cards, he's definitely got much more resources than I do. And he could make a couple deploy actions, and we're probably about par when it comes to just plays. But our planet number 5 is green. It's not going to be hugely desirable for Broderick to go to, so I was thinking in my mind, what if I put my Rogue Trader to planet number 4? I could get a card and 2 resources, but then if I do that, Chris is probably going to send his Warlord to Aatrox Prime, and if I put units, like if I have Broderick go to planet number 3, if I've got an Anxious Infantry Platoon at planet number 3, if I have to blow up my troop transport at that planet, that's going to be an absolutely fabulous target for him to shoot Aatrox Prime off on. So I believe I end up deciding on planet number 5 for this Rogue Trader. Looks like I'm going to be playing that now. Okay, looks like I go back on it. So again, this, yeah, my opponent calls out if I'm actually there, and I have to apologize sincerely to you, my dear viewers. Again, definitely not exactly an in-practice player, so the ordeal of playing Conquest is like, oh, I don't know, it's like slitting my own wrists from time and time again. It takes a mountain of effort here and then, but if I end up putting that rogue trader to planet number 5, I think that's going to be a pretty desirable destination. I'm definitely going to want to send my own warlord to planet number 3 because I want to do that random card discard. Even though he's got that copy of Ammo Depot and he's going to be able to win himself additional cards every round, I still think that if I can get rid of one thing that he's really, really wanting to hold on to, that could definitely work favorably for me. But I'm just still kind of stuck. Do I want to push planet number 1 or not? I kind of ultimately come to the conclusion that Ammo Depot is just too big of a risk, and I can't really press my luck by trying to extend or protract the length of this game just because I don't have a big economic advantage. And that Snakebite Thug sitting there at planet number 2, I don't really have anything to remove that stubborn unit. If I send my Warlord to that planet, I'll be pummeled into oblivion. I could use an Inquisitorial Fortress, but that would be 2 resources invested just to dislodge that copy of Snakebite Thug, which would be bouncing into his HQ and then being redeposited on some more relevant planet. And something I need not necessarily worry about is if there's a battle fought at planet number 1, like when planet number 1 happens to be Farron, if I've got all of my units deployed at green strongpoint planets, then I won't have to worry about being routed in the first place because Broderick Worr grants them immunity to that ability. And if he wants to route my dumbass rogue trader, that's perfectly fine in my book. So at the moment, I'm thinking his Broderick Worr could show up to planet number 1 where he'll have initiative, or he could show up to planet number 3 or planet number 4, but I'm probably thinking that his most desirable location is going to be planet number 3. And if that's the case, and that's where I'm intending to send my Warlord, I imagine he'll blow up his troop transport, but should he do that, I will be able to possibly staging ground a platoon or some other cheaper unit into play. My opponent does one of his scarcely few remaining deploy actions, one of his last 3 cards, to put out a copy of Snakebite Thug to planet number 4, and that kind of convinces me that my opponent is going to be showing up at planet number 3. So I'm thinking, all right, if I put my Steel Legion Chimera that I'm going to be in the process of perhaps playing, if I put some powerful unit at planet number 1, I'll probably be able to win that planet in regard to command, unless Broderick shows up at that planet. But I'm thinking my opponent definitely wants to get some additional cards for himself, so he's probably going to be sending his Warlord to planet number 3. I was definitely at a bit of a loss, kind of not sure what to think. So let's say, hypothetically, I put my Steel Legion Chimera on planet number 1. If Broderick shows up, okay, so good. I go through with it. We've got a concrete example here. Again, I apologize for how long I take. Broderick shows up at planet number 1. I don't end up getting those 2 resources, but Broderick's going to have to take a swing at me. My Chimera is only going to take 2 points of damage. It can attack in return, deal 3 points of damage, possibly. To Broderick, I can use my troop transport to put 2 units into play, and then, depending on what I get, like planet number 5 is going to be 2 resources for me. So I'm thinking, okay, Broderick can't be in 2 places at once. If he goes to planet number 1, I'll get 2 resources at planet number 5. I'll be able to do an anxious infantry platoon. If Broderick shows up at planet number 1, if he swings at my Steel Legion Chimera, I survive. I could attack back for 3. I could pop my troop transport. I could deal out incremental additional points of damage to Broderick Worr, and I could use staging ground to throw an anxious infantry platoon also to planet number 1. So even if he uses his own troop transport, I'd probably be able to force Broderick away from that planet, and things would end up working out pretty well for me. Planet number 3 is going to be pretty interesting because, note, we've both got our troop transport available, but I've now ended up managing to come across 4 resources, and thanks to my staging ground, I'll be able to throw a platoon to planet number 3. My opponent, if we both use our troop transports at planet number 1, that's going to accomplish parity, and if I win our first planet, that'll be 2 green strongpoint icons for me, putting me ever closer to my victory condition, and in doing that, it's going to steal 1 resource from my opponent, so he'll still be sitting at a monumental number of cards, a whopping total of a total of 3 cards, but he'll only have 7 resources, and that's going to give me an additional resource, and I'm just kind of hoping and praying that I'm going to end up stumbling across those copies in my deck of Ammo Depot, which are actually a card I've never played before. Again, I say it too much, I get a bunch of shit from the community, but screw it. I've, played 25-30 games. I don't have a lot of experience, so I've never played Ammo Depot. Something I was incredibly careful about during this match is calling out, do you have an action? Do I have an action? Because both of us have, command actions, combat actions. He could do Preemptive Barrage, the Emperor's Warrant again, so I definitely don't want to reveal any additional information to my opponent, and then have the kind of effect happen where it's like, well, you attacked, but I was going to use Preemptive Barrage or something like that. So my opponent at planet number 3, prior to attacking with his Warlord, decides to use, not Preemptive Barrage, he decides to use troop transport, so he generates 2 guardsmen tokens at that planet. They have the soldier trait, and again, I'm concerned in the back of my mind about Elysian Assault Team, but I've got my copy of Staging Ground. My opponent has the initiative, and I'm just trying to think, so long as I can get my Warlord away from this planet, hail, it's not going to be that big of a deal, because now this is definitely my victory condition planet. So I don't have any shield cards at all in hand. My opponent swings for 2 at me, so I have to take that damage to the nose, and I'm trying to decide, do I want to attack with my Warlord? Do I want to retreat with my Warlord? Spoiler, the answer is no. What I want to do is slowly but surely, once I verify it's going to be my opportunity to take an action, is I want to use my Staging Ground to throw a copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon in play. And I'm always thinking, what do I want to do to try to minimize the amount of damage that I'm taking and to create some sort of action disadvantage from my opponent. So he's got a Guardsman token, and he's got Broderick Worr. If I throw out my 4/3 unit and I hit his Warlord, worst case scenario is he's going to be using a copy of a Commissarial Bolt Pistol to reduce that damage to 1, and then I don't really have, much of anything to show for my efforts. He can attack again with his Ready Guardsman token and then attack again with Broderick Worr, and that puts me in a really crappy position of possibly being bloodied. But because this is my victory condition planet, I'm not going to feel too terribly bad about using my troop transport here, so I throw out my Anxious Infantry Platoon. To my good fortune, my opponent decides not to use a Commissarial Bolt Pistol as shield, whether he has it or not, so 4 damage, of course, even -2 if I saw the discard of a Preemptive Barrage 2 arms, or Honorifica Imperialis, or whatever the other unmentioned 2 shield value AM card is, it would have been insufficient to save his Guardsman token. So what are we going to see here? This is going to be his Warlord's move. I've got my infantry platoon. I've got my Warlord sitting at that planet. He could attack me, but if he exhausts his Warlord, I could pop my troop transport, and then I could attack him for 2, a total of 3 times, and if that bloodies his Warlord, if that depletes his hand of shield cards, that's going to put him in a really crappy position, and I guess it's all going to come down to, is he going to be willing to take that risk or not? If I don't need to use my troop transport, then I'm not going to. Really, the best case scenario for me is maybe his copy of Broderick, his Warlord, running away from this planet, and then I can use my Warlord to potentially deal out the killing blow to his Guardsman token, and then just hope against hope that he's not going to be able to drop, say, 2 copies of Elysian Assault he meant to play, because that would result in the bloodying of my Warlord. But again, this is all kind of a game of statistics here. My opponent, it's not as if I can at will check during the post-game commentary here, but frequently throughout the match, I kind of check how many cards my opponent has remaining in his deck. Like, I've drawn 11 cards, so I think with my opponent having 3 cards in hand, it's relatively unlikely that he'll be able to do that double Elysian Assault team, and, to the victor goes, well, if you never take a little bit of risk, then you might not end up winning against a really competent player. So right here at this planet, my opponent is trying to decide, does he want to use an action? Does he want to retreat? Does he want to attack my Warlord? Really, all I can do is pop my transport or not based upon the action of my enemy, but why don't I pause for a moment and let's see what he does. So my opponent indicates that he does not have an action, and now it's going to be his opportunity to take a swing. So his Warlord exhausts and retreats, and this means that it's going to be my opportunity to use a combat turn thereafter to take a swing and potentially kill off his Guardsman token. And then with my opponent having just 3 cards in hand, that forced random discard might be able to pay off big time. So my opponent indicates he has no action. I, of course, myself have no action, and that forced random discard is going to be just of paramount importance. It's going to be the critically powerful card, Preemptive Barrage. So I indicate that I trigger that planet, and then of course after the fact I notice that he's already discarded a card. My Warlord bounces from that planet. I use that copy of Staging Ground to throw that Anxious Infantry platoon to our current planet number 3, so it's going to sit there the following round. It's going to contribute to my winning command. It's going to potentially fuel my victory condition, and that is going to be us ending our turn. So the initiative token is going to go to me. Our new 5th final planet of the game is going to be Eloith, and now this is going to be a planet currently positioned at planet number 1 that's kind of going to be irrelevant to my victory condition. I could kind of give a shit less as to whether or not my opponent captures it, and he's got that copy of Snakebite Thug positioned at that planet. So this is where things start to look pretty interesting, and I really start to worry. My opponent has got 11 resources and 4 cards, but he's also got a copy of Ammo Depot. I've got 7 resources and 5 cards, but I don't really like what I've got in my hand, and 2 out of my 5 cards are going to be entirely useless. Something I could do, but it wouldn't be very much good, is I could throw out that copy of Inquisitorial Fortress. I could rout my opponent's Snakebite Thug sitting at planet number 3. It'll deny him a card and a resource from winning command at that planet, but if I do that, he might be able to throw that Snakebite Thug to a planet where it's going to be able to contribute to blocking me off. Like if he ends up sending it to, I don't know, planet number 1 or something like that, or if he goes to planet number 2, he could potentially drop a big 3-4 unit. That giant beefy carapace, that orcish hide, is going to take a lot of damage being dealt out to it, and therefore that could just absolutely kind of suck and make it all the less likely that I'm going to be able to win. I do decide to play a copy of Inquisitorial Fortress, because if you look at my hand, my platoon, my Rogue Trader, and my Sakhalem Shrine Guard are going to be a grand total of 4 resources. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to throw out my Inquisitorial Fortress. I might be able to do something devious like like, if my opponent doesn't put any additional units at planet number 1, something I could do is use my fortress to remove his Snakebite Thug from that planet. No player wins it, and then he's denied the opportunity of routing one of my units if I end up putting a unit at a planet like Elowith, because my opponent is definitely going to want to draw cards, and I kind of have it in my mind that my opponent is going to send himself to planet number 5, or my opponent might send himself to planet number 2, and that was definitely something I was beginning to consider based on the presence of that anxious infantry platoon being positioned at planet number 2. So he might be trying to block off my command so I don't automatically win 2 cards at that planet, but additionally, since it's got 3 hit points, if he's got a 2 shield value card in hand, if I send my Warlord to that planet, if I attack his platoon with my platoon, it's only going to be 4 points of damage. If that's cut by 2, that's going to be 2 points. It's going to be insufficient to kill off his unit. He can take a swing of 4 at Broderick, and note, I don't have any shield cards in hand. That could be bloodying my Warlord, and again, if my Warlord got bloodied, that would absolutely just crumple my odds of winning this game here. So I feel very conflicted in regard to what I want to do. I've got a rogue trader. I could put it to planet number 5. I could put it to planet number 1. I think it would probably be a bit of a waste to put my rogue trader at planet number 5, just because if the enemy Warlord shows up at that planet, like, it's a really high-value destination for him. He wants the cards. He wants the bonus that you would get from triggering Elowith's ability, which is to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add one of those cards to your hand. So I think it would be just moronic to send a rogue trader to that planet to die. I was thinking maybe I could do the Sakalem Shrine Guard because it doesn't provide a resource bonus, but then that's not a green planet. I couldn't potentially swing at Broderick for 3, so that's not going to be the most desirable effect. Maybe I could put the Anxious Infantry platoon at planet number 5, and I was thinking that wouldn't necessarily be the worst play in the world, because let's say if I send my Warlord to planet number 5, if the enemy Warlord also shows up to planet number 5, I've got the initiative. I could attack with my Anxious Infantry platoon, potentially deal out 4 points of damage to the enemy Warlord. Either he retreats, I win the cards, and I win the bonus, the battle ability associated with that planet, or my opponent decides to stay and I can use Staging Ground to throw out a card like that Sakalem Shrine Guard to potentially bloody his Warlord. So I'm always kind of thinking, is there anything I can do to try to bloody Broderick? Whether or not I can, I'm just not exactly sure. But, I definitely am also of the mind where, is that a risk? Like, if I send Broderick to planet number 5, I'll be dropping off that Steel Legion Chimera at that planet. And if I do that, then my Steel Legion Chimera won't be positioned at planet number 2, where I'm potentially going to be able to win the game. I'm thinking that if I throw my infantry platoon to a blue planet, or if I send my Steel Legion Chimera to that planet, when I win the battle, something I could do is use my own Inquisitorial Fortress on my army unit stuck at that planet in order to bring it back to my HQ, so that when my Broderick goes to our planet so that when my Warlord the following round goes to Boundless, my victory condition planet, the Steel Legion Chimera or the Anxious Infantry platoon will be in the HQ and it'll travel with him. But I'm also thinking, is that too much of a gamble to put out a bunch of units on that planet? My opponent's got 9 resources and 3 cards. I'm hoping he doesn't have any powerful units, but his ammo depot ends up drawing him an additional card, and I'm starting to get pretty worried because I'm also concerned, what if my opponent has another goddamn copy of the Emperor's Warrant? If I send Broderick Worr to planet number 5, what if at planet number 2 he uses like the Anxious Infantry platoon to, like if he exhausts that unit, deals 4 points of damage to the Sakalem Shrine Guard. If he sends Broderick to planet number 2, maybe that ends up working against me, just because I get my forces wrecked by that effect. So I'm thinking, okay, what if I send Broderick to Planet 5, the Steel Legion Chimera shows up, I've got initiative, I could take a swing at his Warlord, he could take a swing at either my Warlord or at my Steel Legion Chimera, and then the Chimera could stay at that planet, it could maybe deal him a point of damage, maybe I end up drawing shield cards, and there's just so many different variables into play here, and this is exactly why I play so long, because I'm not taking as much time as I should in the commentary to really work my way through my thought process, but there's just a lot of kind of crazy possibilities depending on where my opponent's Warlord goes, what he has in hand. But I think to myself, I'm going to be getting a lot more information by the end of the combat, by the end of the deploy phase here. I threw out a copy of the Sakhalem Shrine Guard to planet number 2, so I don't quite have to make my command phase choice yet. There's still more information to be gleaned, but I'm starting to stockpile units up at planet number 2, and I'm starting to get in my mind, what if I throw my Rogue Trader to planet number 1? I could put my Rogue Trader at planet number 3, but then if his copy of Broderick Worr shows up at planet number 3, he'll be able to use Aatrox Prime to blast planet number 2. I won't win a battle at that planet. I won't be able to do a forced random card discard. So I'm starting to think, okay, what if I do Rogue Trader to planet number 1? This is a really unusual play, but my thought was, I'm going to send my Warlord to planet number 5. At the very least, I'm going to be able to deny him that 2-card bonus. At planet number 1, I could, let's say I use Inquisitorial Fortress, rout my opponent's Snakebite Thug, then Farron would have the opportunity to rout any unit that my opponent would have played to planet number 5 there, and between the Steel Legion Chimera, between Broderick Worr, I'd have probably been able to drive off the opponent's Warlord, and if I absolutely had to, I could have used Staging Ground, I could have used Troop Transport, and I feel like that could have potentially worked out pretty well. Granted, some of my units would have been stranded at that location, but regardless, it still could have ended up working out all right for me. Something that also worked against me in hindsight, and it definitely comes back to bite me in the ass the following round, just a little bit of a foreshadowing there, literary device for you viewers, is I kind of forget about the Steel Legion Chimera shaving points of damage off of every other unit, every other non-vehicle unit I have present at a planet. So what I'm thinking in my mind is, okay, I've got that Rogue Trader at planet number 1. The presence of Captain Marcus at that planet definitely sucks because my route option is now gone. I'm not going to be able to get rid of Marcus and the Snakebite Thug. It's not going to be worth using 2 copies of Inquisitorial Fortress just to get rid of those enemy units. And I'm starting to think that, okay, during the final battle, if at some point I can end up bloodying Broderick by some miracle, then I'm going to be able to double activate my fortresses and get rid of the opponent. And just in hindsight, seeing all of these just awful decisions I'm making, I'm really hoping that my opponent in reviewing this video isn't left with the impression that I'm some sort of colossal scrub. So I decide, screw it, I'm gonna do the conservative thing. I can't be too terribly ballsy. If the Emperor's Warrant comes into play, if Broderick shows up at planet number 2, I can't risk losing that planet. I can't risk losing just Boundless. So here is what happens. My opponent, perhaps afraid of my own copy of not Inquisitor's Warrant, the Emperor's Warrant, puts out a copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon stationed at planet number 1, and I feel like on his part that was definitely an overcommittance to that planet. The platoon would have probably much better served him at planet number 2, but I'm thinking, okay, I'm likely going to be winning command at planet number 2, because even if Broderick shows up to that planet, I've got the 2 platoons, I've got the Sakhalem Shrine Guard. Absolute worst case scenario is my opponent uses Broderick, uses the Emperor's Warrant, knocks out my Anxious Infantry Platoon, it kills my Sakhalem Shrine Guard, then he attacks me, kills my own Anxious Infantry Platoon, and then I can dump a couple troops into play, attack, kill off his Anxious Infantry Platoon, and then I can just hope to high heaven that I come across a copy of something to put into play courtesy of that staging ground, and this is definitely a bit of a risk because I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I send my Warlord to planet number 5, the enemy Warlord might show up at that planet, and that way I get my 2 cards from planet number 2, so either way I've got at least some cards coming in, and at planet number 4 I'm going to have at least 2 resources coming in, so I'm going to be able to use staging grounds somewhere, so I can at the very least go off of that information, and I've got that Inquisitorial Fortress if I'm fortunate enough to pull off some kind of ridiculous combo at planet number 5, but, you know, Broderick, like, I apologize for mentioning the fortress, because having seen exactly what my opponent is playing, knowing that he's not allied with Space Marines, there's not going to be any kind of eager recruit or anything like that, there's not going to be any kind of Elysian assault team. So I'm just thinking to myself, Planet 1 would be ridiculous for me to send Broderick to. That would be a death trap. Planet number 2 would be the very conservative play. But I'm thinking, God, if I go to planet number 5, I could probably get away with doing that. I could probably force my opponent away from that planet, but things could go bad, things could go well. I feel like it will be a gamble to go to planet number 5, but let's pause and let's see what I decide to do. Alright, so after skipping ahead a few minutes in this video, I finally bring the world's longest command phase to an end out of just kind of frustration and uncertainty in regard to what exactly to do. I do make my decision to go to planet number 5, and I note that I'm not exactly punished for my choice, but if it was not obvious to you, viewers, what is planet number 1? It is Farron. What does that allow you to do? It allows you to choose a unit to be routed. Which of my units is eligible to be routed? Of course, it's going to be that Steel Legion Chimera sitting at planet number 5. So, this kind of sucks. I end up coming across 2 cards and 2 resources in total. My opponent gets 1 card and 3 resources. Note, planet number 2 kind of paid off. The cards I came across are going to be a copy of Suppressive Fire and Preemptive Barrage. We're going to see battles break out at planet number 1. That's going to be my Rogue Trader quite handily killed. Planet number 2, I got cards from that planet, but at the very least, I've got all of my units nicely set up for my victory condition, and my opponent there, he's got a hell of a lot of units at planet number 1, but they're going to be showing up during the following round exhausted, so I'm not exactly sure when I realize that my Steel Legion Chimera is going to be routed, but even knowing that I'm going to have my unit routed there, like, something I easily could have done is routed it myself with Inquisitorial Fortress, or, regardless of what exactly occurred, by having both of our Warlords show up at the same planet, not the first planets, I was able to actually block off my opponent drawing 2 cards at that planet, even though I wasn't able to get those myself. And the more cards I can block, the better, because that copy of Ammo Depot has just been absolutely ruinous to me. Like, God, I forget how many rounds exactly we've seen thus far. I guess I've captured 2 planets. My opponent has captured, he will be capturing 1 soon. So if that's going to be 3 activations of Ammo Depot, I would much prefer if my opponent had 0 or 1 card in hand right now as opposed to 3. So that card has definitely been working against me this entire game, as well it should, and I'd be feeling much better if my opponent didn't have 3 unknown cards in hand, and 7 resources is just my absolute nightmare. So, planet number 1, my Rogue Trader is going to end up being killed. Farron only really has 2 targets to route. It's going to be my dumbass copy of Rogue Trader. It's going to be my Steel Legion Chimera. If my Chimera is kicked from Eloith, then I may as well just give up that planet for not wanting Broderick Worr to be bloodied. I was thinking what I might be able to do at our soon-to-be first planet, because I ended up coming across that copy of Preemptive Barrage, is I could either save Preemptive Barrage and, well, like, I could use Preemptive Barrage as shields at Elowith if my Steel Legion Chimera was going to be sticking around, so that I could maybe bloody Broderick, and then again I could use both of my Inquisitorial Fortresses to remove Astra Militarum faction units from our soon-to-be, possibly, victory condition planet for yours truly. But I also wanted to hold on to Preemptive Barrage just because, unless my opponent had a monumental number of shield cards in hand, I could use Preemptive Barrage conventionally during the following round to give both of my Anxious Infantry platoons and my Sakhalem Shrine Guard ranged if my opponent doesn't have his own copy of Preemptive Barrage, and then, because Broderick is going to be showing up at planet number 1, the following round, with the platoon, with the Snakebite Thug, with Captain Marcus, I'll have the opportunity to potentially deal 4 damage, 4 damage, and 3 damage to the enemy Broderick Worr. Granted, Captain Marcus is going to be able to exhaust one of my units, and my opponent might have shield cards, but even if that is the case, I can still attack with ranged and kill off some of my opponent's, ready units. And now, that Steel Legion Chimera, and don't I feel like a bit of a dumb fuck, it's going to rout my Steel Legion Chimera, so I'm left with really no other option, but I've got initiative, but my opponent has more HP than I do. I've got that copy of Preemptive Barrage, but I definitely want to save it, so I just kind of bite the bullet and say, okay, fine, you can have Elowith's battle ability, and I just hope to hell that he doesn't end up coming across anything too monumentally nasty, like, oh god, I don't know, Forward Barracks could ruin me during this last round, or if he gets another copy of, if he draws a copy of Preemptive Barrage, or the Emperor's Warrant, or any number of other effects could just be my absolute nightmare. So, slowly but surely, I'm trying to get it through my thick skull that I should probably retreat Broderick from this planet. I could blow up my troop transport, drop off one 1/2 soldier trait token at that planet, but what's that going to be able to do? A whole lot of nothing. Staging Ground isn't going to be able to put any big nasty unit into play. I wish I had another copy of, like, Anxious Infantry platoon to throw out at this planet that I might be able to somehow bloody the opponent's copy of Broderick, but again, it's just kind of going the conservative thing. I'm playing kind of aggressively in this game, but I've definitely made a hell of a lot of mistakes thus far, but if I make a bunch of moronic decisions, I could end up losing this game when it looks like it could end up going reasonably well for me. Like at this final round, if I get lucky and my opponent doesn't have any big powerful units to put out to our soon-to-be planet number 1, troop transport's going to be another additional couple 2/2s at that planet. Suppressive fire is going to mean that I can knock out some individual enemy unit. If by a miracle I bloody Broderick, my Inquisitorial Fortresses are going to be able to pick apart his units. I decide to retreat from that planet, and I think for the first time in the match, I actually forget to ask my opponent if he has an action. I definitely feel like a bit of an asshole now and then for that transgression, but I say, very well, my dear opponent, Elowith is yours. Now he's going to take a look at the top 3 cards of his deck, and based on how long he chooses to look at the cards in his deck, I'm kind of thinking, if he picks something immediately, then he's just going to get absolute solid gold. If he takes a little bit of time, then he's probably picking between some suboptimal choices, and I'm just hoping and praying that he takes a long-ass time to make his decision. So he's currently still searching the top cards of his deck, and that leads me to believe that he probably didn't hit something amazing like Forward Barracks. And I'm just hoping, praying, not a man of faith, but saying a little bit of a non-prayer, entirely tongue-in-cheek. I didn't actually do this in the moment. But regardless, just getting ready, he finally picks a card, and I ask, shall I end the turn? Shall I potentially see if I can win the game, or if I get to humiliate myself in front of, I don't know, a couple hundred viewers, however many people end up watching this video? We see our possibly final HQ phase. Note that the initiative token is going to be in the possession of my opponent. I ended up coming across a copy of Ammo Depot and Promotion. I've got 7 resources, but what do I have to purchase with those? I've got a Preemptive Barrage, I've got an Ammo Depot, I've got the Inquisitorial Fortress, but that is going to be a whole hell of a lot of nothing. So I've got 7 resources, 5 cards, relative to my opponent's 11 resources and 6 cards, and I'm thinking to myself, no, please please let me win 5 matches in a row. Everybody, you know, all the kids at school will make fun of me if I don't end up going undefeated in Swiss. And to my living nightmare, he throws out a copy of Forward Barracks. So whether he drew it thanks to Eloith, whether he drew it thanks to, his HQ phase, he calls out Squigbomben, and I'm sure to his delight, I do not happen to possess a copy of that. He throws out the woo! So I do not have a copy of Squigbomben that I drew in any case to destroy his copy of Forward Barracks. I throw out a copy of Ammo Depot of my own, and now it's going to be the deploy stall game. So again, I about crap my pants when I see a copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon sit down on planet number 1, and I'm starting to think, okay, I'm going to be bringing Broderick, I'm going to be bringing Steel Legion Chimera, 2 Guardsman tokens, I've got a staging ground, I'm hoping and praying that I end up drawing some kind of unit that I can put into play, draw it during the command phase, play it during combat. I've got really nothing else to spend my resources on. I think I'm going to use my I'm going to use my troop transport now because it's an action you can use during any phase, and I'm thinking, why not give myself all the more deploy stall? I'm going to be using troop transport regardless. Why not use it now? It's not as if my opponent has, Gleeful Plague Beast, or I guess in hindsight he could have been using Mordian Hellhound or something like that, and that's not to say he doesn't use one. Let's see what exactly happens. I guess he could also be using Daring Assault Squad. That does not happen to be loyal, if memory serves. So I create a couple Guardsman tokens for myself. I've got that Suppressive Fire to get rid of a single area effect 1 unit, and I'm thinking if I can by some miracle kill that goddamn Broderick Worr, if I can get him, then that'll be 2 copies of Inquisitorial Fortress, removing enemy units. But I'm thinking to myself also, my Preemptive Barrage, I'm going to have to try to kill off as many ideally ready enemy units as possible. Like in a perfect world, I'll use Preemptive Barrage, my Anxious Infantry platoons kill my enemies, Anxious Infantry platoons, again, another frickin' powerful army unit he plays at that planet. If my Sakhalem Shrine Guard kills his Sakhalem Shrine Guard, if my Guardsman tokens team up, kill off his sole remaining Anxious Infantry platoon, then that is going to put me at an enormous action advantage, and even if he's going to be generating a Guardsman token at the end of each and every combat round, I could nevertheless manage to kind of come back, slowly but surely make all the difference, whittle away his forces. I trigger my own copy of Ammo Depot, and yes, viewers, I get my own copy of Forward Barracks, so it looks like meat is back on the menu. I can match his generating 1 Guardsman token at the end of every round, and now I'm thinking in my mind it's going to be of the paramount importance that I manage to retreat my copy of Broderick Worr from that planet prior to being bloodied, because if I can keep my Broderick Worr hale, then I need not purchase my Anxious Infantry platoons at the end of every combat round. I'll be attacking for extra, and my Guardsman tokens are also going to be attacking for 2. And if, again, if I can manage to bloody his Broderick, he could have all the resources in the world, but in some giant battle of attrition, eventually he's going to run out of resources to continue keeping those copies of Anxious Infantry platoon in play, fighting at a planet. So it's all going to come down to, am I going to be able to bloody his Warlord, or am I going to waste a bunch of damage wounding his Warlord, and then his Warlord retreats, and then he's got the initiative token. Is he going to have Preemptive Barrage? Is he going to be able to bloody my Warlord? So something I was thinking I might have to do is if we both send our Warlords to planet number 1, if he uses Preemptive Barrage, then I will be forced to use Preemptive Barrage as well. He could attack for 4 with an infantry platoon. I could discard Suppressive Fire as a shield to block that damage, and therefore my Warlord would live at 1 hit point, and then I'll be able to use him during the ranged skirmish round to retreat safely back to my HQ. I'll stomach another attack, but I'll get to attack during range myself, myself, and then we'll get bogged down in some gigantic protracted conflict. Notably, I've got 3 command icons at planet number 1. My opponent has 3 command icons at planet number 1, so I throw out a copy of Promotion to ensure that I can end up getting a couple of cards. My opponent throws out a copy of Sanctioned Psyker at planet number 4, and note, he used a copy of 2 arms, that 2 shield value card, to ready his ammo depot, and that is going to allow him to draw an additional card. So I could only imagine that he is digging for the Emperor's Warrant or Preemptive Barrage, and I'm thinking, you know, God, it's looking way too close for my own liking. Like, if I have to retreat, like, if he does the Preemptive Barrage trick and I have to throw away Suppressive Fire to preserve Broderick, then I'm going to be down 1 event, I'm going to be down a combat turn. Maybe, because I have so few shields, he's going to be able to kill off one of my Anxious Infantry platoons, and I'm slowly but surely going to be losing that battle of attrition, because at the end of each and every combat round, he's going to be generating a Guardsman token, so am I, but then Captain Marcus is going to be ready, the Snakebite Thug is going to be ready, he'll have his Warlord, and he'll have an Anxious Infantry platoon, so things are looking pretty goddamn grim. And notice, viewers, how I keep talking about discarding Suppressive Fire to prevent 1 point of damage, because what do I forget about entirely? I forget that Steel Legion Chimera is going to have the effect of stripping 1 point of damage off of each and every goddamn non-vehicle trait army unit or Warlord unit or Synapse unit I have at that planet. So, I guess, spoiler alert, look what dumbass is going to end up throwing away his copy of Suppressive Fire, as opposed to just, you know, basically I throw away that event and I should have saved it, and I about shit my pants when that happens, because I feel like I've thrown away this entire match, just with the loss of that one event. But both Warlords show up at planet number 1. I'm only going to win 2 resources at planet number 2, but I'm also going to win a couple of cards at planet number 1. My opponent is going to win 3 cards and 1 resource between planets 2 and planets 2 and 4, and now I'm just hoping that I end up getting something decent and I get a copy of Anxious Infantry platoon to my delight, and I'm thinking, yes, thank you, I can use Staging Ground to put that Anxious Infantry platoon into play. And we're about to have combat break out. I'm waiting for my opponent. Do you have any combat, or do you have any command actions? You know, waiting with bated breath to see. I'm about to ask, do you have any combat actions? I'm hoping and praying that my opponent does not have a copy of Preemptive Barrage. He says actions in command pass, and my heart is probably going a million miles a minute at this point, or, you know, 1.6 million kilometers per minute if you're, you know, in a country where you actually believe in the metric system, which I wish dear America would. So he says, I say, I also pass in command. He says, pass in combat, and I say, you do not have a combat action. Can I verify this? Because I don't want to throw out Preemptive Barrage. You know, if he's going to be able to answer with his own, necessarily, I still would. But, you know, I guess he was not fortunate enough. I don't know if it happened on camera, since I'm kind of skipping through a lot of these dead air segments, but I've been checking his deck, hoping that he's not gotten his second copy of Preemptive Barrage. Looks as though I am lucky enough. There we go. I take a look at his discard pile, and I'm trying to think, what on earth do you have in regard to shields? You've got 3 2-shield value cards used, and I'm just trying to think, okay, you've drawn through about half of your deck. What do you still have in regard to shields? I'm going to use Staging Ground to put an Anxious Infantry platoon into play. If I can use all of my platoons with ranged to swing at his Warlord, let's say he's got 2 2-shield value shield cards, and he's got a 3-value shield card as well. 2 minus 2 is going to be 2. Another instance of 2, thanks to a 2-shielder, is going to be 4. But if I attack with all of my units, if he's got another, well, if he's got his Commissarial Bolt Pistol, that's only going to be a single point of damage dealt out to Broderick, and that means he's going to be able to retreat with his Warlord, having only 1 hit point remaining, and that means that without being able to bloody his Warlord, my Inquisitorial Fortresses are going to be absolutely useless. So again, I'm just starting to think like, God, this about sucks. And I kind of missed this in hindsight, but my opponent calls out GG, and I totally missed this. So I throw out the preemptive barrage, and he ends up saying that let's play it out. But like I'm saying now, he calls out good game, but I totally missed him saying that. But regardless, he says, I'll play it out. That's what I was digging for as well. But, keep watching, dear viewers. I could very easily screw this up, and believe me, I'm about to. So he uses his copy of Captain Marcus. He discards a copy of Snakebite Thug to activate Captain Marcus's ability. I indicate you have to actually use an AM unit to do that. Note, he's only got, ready AM units. He's got Anxious Infantry Platoon, but it's exhausted. So he decides to use a 3/2 copy of Sakhalem Shrine Guard to knock out one of my now ranged Anxious Infantry Platoons. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, my opponent has got 6 cards. The best I could do is 8 total points of damage among 2 different attacks to his Warlord. If I screw this up, if he's got 2 1-value shield cards, 4 + 4 -1 is going to be 6, but if he's got even a single 2-value shield card or 1 3-value shield card, then any attacks I direct against Broderick Worr are going to be wasted. So there's plenty of opportunity for me to screw this up. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I want to use both of my platoons to deal out damage, kill off some of his ready units. But this is what sucks. If he's able to shield against those units, he's going to be able to attack me. He's going to be able to swing at my Warlord for 4. I'm thinking in my mind, okay, I don't want to do it, but I can discard that copy of Suppressive Fire. That means I'm going to take 1 less damage than it'll require for me to be bloodied. Then I can retreat with my Warlord, and then what I can do is I can retreat from that planet. I can slowly but surely potentially win a battle of attrition, because even though he's still got his Warlord, I'm going to be able to attack with both of my platoons. I'm going to be able to attack with my Shrine Guard and both of my Guardsman tokens as well. So I take a swing with one of my infantry platoons, and what exactly are we going to see? My opponent is kind of going through the process of adding and removing some tokens from Captain Marcus to indicate that he's used his ability, that limit once per phase ability. So I've got an attack of 4 going out during the ranged skirmish round, directed toward that copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon. And what exactly are we going to see here? Are we going to see a shield card? And yes, we are. That's going to be a copy of Commissarial Bolt Pistol, so that is only going to be a single instance of damage dealt out to that unit, and I am just being filled with dread. I'm thinking to myself, God, this is going all the way bad, but I'm going to be able to exhaust my other Anxious Infantry Platoon, finish the fight, potentially, guaranteed, because I can deal 2 points of damage no matter what. There's no Glorious Intervention or Indomitable. That is going to be a dead copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon, and it is now going to be my opponent's opportunity to attack. He's going to take a swing at my Warlord for 4, is, really the only thing I have in my mind. And, let's wait for him to do it. I'm waiting for my opponent to take an action here, so I specifically state, it's your combat turn. I don't know what kind of action he's got going through his mind, and I'm just absolutely terrified. My opponent's got 5 resources. He's got 5 cards in hand. I'm thinking, oh God, what if I retreat? Broderick Worr, I'm not going to have Suppressive Fire. My Steel Legion Chimera may as well not exist. What if he's got 1 or more copies of the Emperor's Warrant? There's not going to be anything I can do to resist that effect, and like a goddamn dumbass, this is where I throw out that copy of Suppressive Fire. I deal 3 points of damage to Broderick Worr because I've forgotten about that copy of Steel Legion Chimera, but my Warlord is sitting there with 1 point of damage remaining. I ask, do you have any damage? And, I definitely have to take my hat off to my opponent because he says the damage is wrong, and I initially thought that, I discarded a shield, and he says 4 -1 is, 2, and I, face palm, I slap myself in the forehead, and I'm just thinking, oh my God, I've thrown away this match. I need not have used my copy of Suppressive Fire. So, like a total gentleman, Chris says, hey, moron, you've got 1 additional point of damage on your Warlord, but it doesn't matter. I decide to retreat my Warlord from that planet, and I guess in hindsight, it's basically like I didn't need to exhaust Broderick Worr right at that moment anyway, because what I could have done is I could have attacked with my Warlord, dealt a couple points of damage to any one of these units. It's just, suboptimal play after suboptimal play, and then I could have kept Broderick at that planet. The Emperor's Warrant would have been a big deal, so what kind of mistake could I have faced? He could have used that copy of the Emperor's Warrant. He could have exhausted my Guardsman token, killed my Sakhalem Shrine Guard, then I'd have only been able to attack him for 2. I'd have had my Anxious Infantry platoons, but he'd have had initiative, so he could have killed off one of my platoons. I would have killed off one of his. He could have attacked one of my platoons with his Snakebite Thug. I could have attacked his platoons with my Guardsman tokens or something like that, but it just would have been an absolute nightmare. So I take a swing after having retreated with my Warlord. I attack with my Sakhalem Shrine Guard directed at his copy of Anxious Infantry platoon. He discards a copy of the Emperor's Warrant as a shield, which I feel like is probably a big mistake on his part, but regardless, I asked, do you have any additional actions? All of his units are going to be exhausted, and this is where, and it's probably a mistake to actually confess this to my opponent, but I say I'm quite regretting throwing away that suppressive fire in lieu of the Chimera. That was an idiot move. So I've thrown away my copy of suppressive fire. He kind of threw away a copy of the Emperor's Warrant, and I can't help but feel like I don't know what exactly he was thinking I might have left in my hand, but I should not have retreated with Broderick. I should have tried to kill off some of his units. He says, I believe it doesn't matter with such a large advantage here, but I still can't help but feel like, let me run through it again as a bit of a thought experiment. He's got all of his units. He could have used the Emperor's Warrant. He could have, tapped one of my Guardsman tokens, killed my Sakhalem Shrine Guard, or the opposite order. I'd have been able to maybe deal the killing blow to one of his Anxious Infantry platoons, but he'd have still had all of that action advantage. He could have killed one of my, he could have killed my Steel Legion Chimera with his Snakebite Thug, with his copy of Captain Marcus. Then I'd have been able to attack, killed off one of his units. For all I know, maybe he's just got a bunch of army units in hand. Maybe there's just no way of knowing what exactly he has in hand. But he's thinking, and this is just proving to be an absolute nightmare, and I didn't exactly feel like I made half so many errors as I actually did, in hindsight, now that I actually go and watch this match, but this is just frankly pretty humiliating with how suboptimal it is. I felt pretty damn good leaving my match against Davis Kingsley, but now it definitely helps me to realize that many, many mistakes were made, and to all of you doubters out there that I continue to insist that I'm very much a novice player, let this be evidence to that point. So, my Inquisitorial Fortresses, both of those, 2 wasted cards, 4 wasted resources, and again, I'm just waiting for my opponent to decide how exactly he's going to be able to best me here. I've got 2 of my tokens left. I can use this as an opportunity there to deal a couple points of damage to his platoon. I can, kill his wounded platoon, potentially wound his unwounded platoon. Then we'll come to the beginning of combat. He'll have a whole bunch of units with which to attack me. Steel Legion Chimera is going to have to be his priority target, but I've got my Shrine Guard, I've got my platoons, and still we're just waiting on the opponent to decide what kind of actions he has. If he has the Emperor's Warrant, that's going to be a nightmare. He could wait until the beginning of the following round's combat, and he could exhaust one of my platoons, he could kill one of my other platoons, and it would just all totally suck, and I feel like he'd have easily been able to win this one, but to my just utter relief, he calls out, concession, I forfeit, good game, well played, and I accept it. So this was a dog shit game on my part. I cannot say I'm proud of really much of anything that I did during this match, but, very well played game. I hope he didn't think I was being sarcastic as I say, well played game, great match. We hadn't really mentioned first names, but I said, Chris, I think that's your first name. I was just breathing a monumental sigh of relief that this is going to be 5 consecutive weeks, 5 matches in a row. Now, this was a hell of a game. I feel like it easily could have gone all the way bad at that final planet, potentially if he'd have won preemptive, if he'd have stumbled across a copy of Preemptive Barrage, if he'd have kept that copy of the Emperor's Warrant, but it was just, less than ideal play on top of less than ideal play on my part. I feel like this was just a terrible game on my part. By some miracle, I managed to pull through. I made some right decisions. I made some just absolutely horrible plays, and as a player who just absolutely values getting as much value as I can squeeze out of each and every card effect, out of each and every unit, it's frankly unforgivable that I missed out on that Steel Legion Chimera. Like, the Suppressive Fire being able to knock out one of his units was just absolutely integral. If I'd have kept Broderick at that planet, that would have been an additional 2 points of damage that would have been great, could have made all the difference, and importantly, it also would have prevented my opponent the opportunity of using the Emperor's Warrant had he, decided to use that, or whatever else the situation may be. So hopefully this wasn't too bad of a beat for Chris. Kudos to him, a very well game played. A game very well played. This was a hell of a match. Hopefully my commentary hasn't been too aggravating, but Chris, I almost feel awful about beating a player of his caliber with such, just god-awful plays was in this match. But hopefully, like I said, it was not a bad beat. Hopefully you can learn from all the mistakes I made during this game. Hopefully you at least enjoyed something about this match. It was definitely not the most entertaining thing in the world. It was just a total grind the entire process, but at least it's behind me now. And what definitely sucks is having won 5 matches in a row in Swiss, I'm going to be up against the, as of yet, only other undefeated player at this point. It's going to be Eric Keelback, better known throughout the community as Octagon user Whiteblade, someone who rose to prominence and popularity in the community for kind of being the champion of Yuri and Rakarth. He is another individual who was fortunate enough to manage to beat Davis Kingsley, and I actually provided him with the same exact Space Marine faction deck that I used to beat Kingsley's Zerathor myself, so I'm definitely kind of regretting helping a friend. Tournaments definitely bring out the worst, most cutthroat nature about me, and even though I don't play this game very often, rest assured when it comes down to competition, I definitely want to play to win, whether or not I have the skill to do so or not. So hopefully you enjoyed this game. I very much hope you enjoy next week's match. I have no idea who might possibly win against, between Eric and myself. It's going to be a hell of a game. He knows each and every secret that I could possibly bring to bear. Not only does he have each and every video on my channel to go back and watch, but he's got my deck list that I used against Zerathor, and as someone who likes to play Zerathor, it really would have been nice to have that secret tech up my sleeve to be able to potentially trounce him. So no idea what faction I'm going to play, no idea what Warlord I'm going to be playing, and the same can be said for him. So it would be very cool to go undefeated in Swiss. But I suppose since I've spent so much time talking about it, I'm probably jinxing myself, and it's definitely a statistical improbability that I'll be able to do so. And of course, because I presumably have made the final cut by now, just watch how ironic it's going to be when I get eliminated from the tournament in the top 32 single elimination. Like, I'm going to make the final cut no matter what at this point, but I have to win the cut of 32, the cut of 16, the cut of 8, and of 4, and of 2, which means to go undefeated, I have to win 6 matches in a row, or even if I lose my next week's match and I make the top cut, that's still going to be 5 games in a row that I have to win to be the champion of this tournament. And like I said, probably a statistical improbability, but regardless, hopefully you've all enjoyed this game. Please do me a solid and leave in the comments section what I could have done better. I know this was just a disgrace of a game, but like I said, hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. And as always, if you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to my channel if you've not done so already. Or if you are already subscribed, this may not be the best video to share, but please consider sharing some of my other videos, as the more individuals there are that end up being exposed to this game, the more people may give Conquest a try. They might enjoy the experience, pick up the game, join our living card game community, and of course, all together we continue to send the message to Fantasy Flight Games, telling them please continue to support and develop this fantastic product. If at any point you'd like to get in touch with me, I would encourage you to do so through Facebook or on Twitter, and if you ever feel inclined to help support the Hive Tyrant, even $1 or $2 donated on a strictly monthly basis goes miles in helping to recover some of my file hosting and operating expenses, and each additional dollar donated beyond that is going directly back into improving this channel. We can improve the quality of the podcast, we can improve the quality of my record, my capture software, both audio and video, and if you like the Hive Tyrant, there's no more deeply appreciated way to go to show that you care and then you appreciate the content than to make a small donation or contribution to my Patreon. But once again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for putting up with my mindless prattling on. And as always, be sure to check back in again soon for much more Conquest LCG content to come.